Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome to my ink tutorial. I am going to be focusing this tutorial on dye inks, not pigment inks. So let me explain the difference. Dye inks actually dye your paper, so they get absorbed into the paper. They're mostly water-based, so you can blend them. Pigment inks are sticky kind of inks, and so when you put it on your paper, it just sort of lays on the top of your paper. It takes a little bit longer to dry. So it doesn't actually get absorbed. And the reason why I wanted to focus on dye inks is because I feel like they're a little bit more versatile. You can do more with them. Although I do have to say that pigment inks are fantastic with every kind of stamp. So you don't have to worry about the ink kind of balling up if it's a clear stamp that's not very good quality. So you do need to have some pigment inks on hand. But I personally like to collect dye inks, like in a range of colors. So if you're thinking about getting into inks and you're not sure which brand to buy, you should continue to watch this because we're going to see how these do. Okay, so the inks that I'm going to be comparing today, they're all dye once again. The first one is an Adirondack ink. It's made by Ranger. All of these inks are firm foam pads. The second one is Memento. All of these brands have a range of colors. I try to get mostly the same, but I have a little off ones here. So Memento, this is a greenish color. Stampin Up, I have basically pretty much every color of Stampin Up. The one thing I do like about the Stampin Up is when you open them, they kind of stay in their lid, so you don't have to worry about the lid getting lost, which I tend to lose lids on my desk here. And then also they get stored, if you look at this, upside down. That way the ink goes to the top of the ink pad, and so when you flip it over it's ready to use. Anyway, so this is Distress Ink by Tim Holtz. There's a lot of great techniques you can do with this ink. And then Hero Art has several different kinds of ink. And I wanted to compare two different dye inks that they have. One is just a plain old dye ink. And one is a shadow ink. They're both dye inks, so we'll see how they compare. Alright, so how I'm going to do this comparison is I'm going to take two different stamps. Let me show you what I'm going to be using. I'm using this stamp, which I used in my embossing test on my blog, from the Serene Silhouettes Stampin' Up set. It's a wood-mounted rubber stamp. And I picked it because it's got a lot of detail in it, but yet it also has some solid areas. So I'm going to be using this one. And then I decided to use this penny black flower. And the reason why I chose penny black is because if you watch my stamp video, you will find out that there are all different kinds of stamp qualities and materials. Red rubber is one of them, the other is clear. And the clear can vary in quality. There's photopolymer clear and there's non-photopolymer clear. And the photopolymer, in my opinion, gives you a really nice, clean, crisp image. And the non-photopolymer can vary depending on what brand you have and what the quality is. So I decided to go with a non-photopolymer stamp, which is penny black here, and it's got a lot of solid areas and it's also got some detail. But these stamps by penny black are really high quality, so that's how I chose this. So after, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp these onto this Nina Solar white cardstock, and I'm going to do that off camera because that's going to be pretty boring, and then I'll show you what the results are. After I'm done with that, what I'm going to do is I've cut these sheets of cardstock, and I'm going to try to create a colored cardstock with each one of these inks using my foam applicator, which I will show you, my foam applicator. Because that's one of the things I do a lot with these inks is I create backgrounds or mats for my cards, or, you know, emboss resist, you emboss it and you want to ink around it. And so I want a dye ink that's going to be able to do that really well. So that will be step 2. So I will be right back with the results of the stamping. Okay, now I've got everything stamped and I'm going to show you these up close. So first I'm going to show you all of the rubber stamped ones. The first is let's see how close I can get without it going blurry. There we go. Is the Adirondack by Ranger, and it's stamped okay. It was when I was actually using the stamp pad, it seemed like the center wasn't, you know, sometimes it's not quite even all the way across on a stamp pad. The center kind of, you know, had a little dip in it maybe, and so I had a hard time getting the center of my stamp inked up. But it's kind of splotchy, and the image is okay crisp, not great, but I can see a lot of white in the solid areas. And the same exact thing with the Memento. In fact, with the Memento, the antenna on the butterfly kind of disappeared a little bit, and I do see a lot of white areas. And if you look, you can compare there's a white line that goes around the circle, and you can see the white line is not very, like, it varies in size as it goes across, whereas this is a little bit better, but this is not so great. Stampin' Up! Did really well, I think. You can see a nice, crisp, clear image. That white line going all the way around seems pretty even. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. The Distress, definitely blotchy, but I know Distress inks are really not the best for general stamping with a stamp. They're more for techniques, water-based coloring, and things like that. So I wasn't expecting it to be great anyway, but it does have a lot of white actually in between, and the lines are not very crisp, although I do get a white line all the way across, not totally even all the way around, but I can see the antenna in there. Next is the Hero Hues Dye Ink, and I thought this one did really well too. If you can see the antenna of the butterfly, and if you look at the line that goes all the way around, it's better, but I don't think it's quite as crisp as the Stampin' Up! Image. I'd probably rank it second. And then finally you have the Hero Art Shadow Ink, which I did let this dry a little while because you're supposed to be able to let it dry and it'll kind of absorb better into the paper. But I don't think it's a very crisp image. And then you actually, the part of the antenna on the butterfly disappeared a little bit. So anyway, I wouldn't say it was the best. So overall, as far as the rubber stamps go, Stampin' Up! And Hero Hues seem to do the best. Okay, so moving down to the acrylic stamp that I used. I'll do it in the same order here. So the Adirondack Ink. I want to get some light on there. There we go. It was not good at all. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's got tons of white dots in it, and like thick dots and barely any ink dots. So I think what's happening here is this ink is balling up a little bit on the stamp and causing it to do that, and so you really even can't see the lines, the little circle lines going through the flower petal. The Memento did better, better than the Adirondack. But you can still see, if you look, there's like all these white kind of dots everywhere. Not sure why that is. You can see the lines in the petals a little bit better, but I don't know. The color was pretty bright and vibrant, so I don't know. I kind of give it a so-so. The Stampin' Up! Did really well, very crisp and clean. The lines were very clear and all that, so that was good. Similar to the rubber stamping. The Distress gave a similar result as the rubber stamp. You can't really see the lines in here, kind of similar to the Adirondacks. They're both Ranger, so, but again, you know, Distress is not really made for general stamping. So moving to the Hero Hues, this one looked really good, I thought. There was kind of some darker areas on the edges, so it wasn't completely and totally even, but it gave a really good image as far as I could see all the different white circles that make up this flower petal. And then the Shadow Ink was not that great. There's a lot of white areas where the solid areas are, and all these little dots really kind of ran together. If you want to compare those two next to each other, you can see how you can really see these lines, and then over here you really can't. So as far as general stamping goes, I would say Stampin' Up! And Hero Hues probably came in the top. So next step is we're going to take these sheets of paper here, and we're going to take each ink one at a time, and I'm going to see how it does for creating some cardstock. Okay, so the first one I'm going to do is the Adirondack, and so I'm just going to dip this in here. I'm going to use my normal technique. This is pretty nice. I'm putting very light pressure. This is a new ink pad, so I'm expecting it to be fairly juicy. I do see kind of brush marks, which is a little strange. But as I apply more layers, okay, I think this is really good. This gave me some really good vibrant color. There are some dark areas, but you know what? I think we're going to find that in pretty much all the different inks. But it made a nice piece of paper. I like it. I think when I'm done here, I'm also going to spritz them with water and see how they compare. So let me clean up for the next one. Okay, next up is Memento. And just so you know, I have an applicator for each color. So I'm not using the red one I have a green one here. So I'm going to use the green on this. Again, this is kind of a new pad, so we'll see how it takes to the paper. Getting that same sort of brush mark. And there might be some variation in how I apply it, just because it's not going to be the same. There's human error in here. Okay, so this one, I think it wasn't as good as this one. It wasn't as easy. You can see this one's a little bit splotchier. There's darker areas and lighter areas, and I felt like the more ink I applied here, the more blended it became, versus the more ink I applied here, it blended a little bit better, but not quite as good as the one I just did. So I have still a lot of dark areas and light areas, but you know, sometimes that's the effect of creating your own colored cardstock, as it is variable in shades. So let me get set up for the next one. Okay, next up is Stampin' Up. So I've got my blue applicator here. It's really interesting, I'm not getting those brush marks that I got in the other ones, but I am getting squares, or rectangles I should say, a little bit more than the other ones. Okay, so here's Stampin' Up. I kind of feel like I got the same sort of result as the Memento. Maybe a little bit more blocking on this one, and but less brush strokes. So this is a little smoother, yet it's got a little bit more blocks in it. But still, I mean, it's still pretty good. It's still pretty good. Okay. Let's move on. Alright, next up is Distress Ink. I'm using Faded Jeans, and I actually switched to a different blue pad, so that way I would start with a fresh one for each ink. And I'm expecting that this is going to perform a little bit better, just because that's what I usually use this ink for, is this type of thing. And as you can see, I'm really not getting a whole lot of blocking. Same with the Adirondack. This one, not surprising, it worked really well. Very smooth, even coverage. I think the Stampin' Up ink was drying faster than I was applying it. Same with the Memento, and the Adirondack, which is also made by Ranger, had that same characteristic in that it wasn't drying quite as fast as I was applying it. So that's the best so far. Okay, and then finally we have the last two Hero Art, so let's get that set up. Okay, Hero Hues. Again, I switched out my pad. This is very juicy, so I'm a little nervous. Well, maybe it's not quite as juicy as I thought. I'm seeing those brush marks again. Okay, so I have to say I'm very impressed with this one. It's almost as good as the Distress, and I felt like as I was applying more and more ink, it was blending more and more, just like the Adirondack. So, I mean, really, honestly, they all really look good because they're just good dye inks. But I really, really like that a lot. I like that a lot. Okay, one more to go. Let's do the last Hero Arts ink. Okay, last one. This is my neutral one, so let's see. It's a little difficult right now. Let's see. Getting a lot of blocks and brush. And it's taking, this ink pad is not that old, so it can't be that there's not enough ink on it, so I don't know. Let's finish this up and see. Okay. This one was hard to do. I don't know why. I still could see a little bit of lines in here. It's okay, but you know what? Let's give it 5 minutes because it's supposed to absorb over time. So let's just wait 5 minutes. I'll be right back. Okay, it's been not quite 5 minutes, but I have to tell you that this really is amazing. I mean, it has completely evened out and it looks awesome. I mean, it looks like I bought the cardstock in this color. That's how great it is. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so to summarize, I think when you're looking at how these cover cardstock, I would say that the Hero Hues and the Hero Art Shadow probably, well, and the Distress. These three are my favorites, and the Hero Art Shadow is the best. And then I think the Distress and the Hero Hues are pretty much neck and neck. I might put the next one, the Adirondack, because you can still see kind of dark areas. Same with the Memento, although I think the Adirondack is just a little bit better than the Memento. And I'd say the Stampin' Up, it's okay. It's definitely more splotchy, especially when you compare the first to the last. I mean, it's definitely more splotchy. But, you know, not every ink is perfect. So that's how I would rank these. And then back up here, coming back to this, I think Stampin' Up has just a slight edge in the stamping. Just very, very small than the Hero Hues. But those are my top two here, is the Stampin' Up and the Hero Hues. I did not like, even though, you know, the shadow worked great on this, it's not my favorite for this. So, you know, there's different purposes for each kind of ink. You just kind of have to figure out what you're going to do the most of and get what's best for you. So hopefully this helped you, and I'm going to put some photos of these on my blog so you can check them out up close. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. One thing I forgot to do was put water on them, so I'm going to spritz water on these and see what the reaction is. One at a time. So let's see, Distress. I'm going to be pretty generous with the water here and let it kind of settle in there. I do this a lot with just kind of texturing paper. Let's let that sit for a second. Okay, so now let's take a look. It looks like the Stampin' Up! Had the best reaction with the water. It really removed color, pushed it out, and created these really cool water spots. Distress also had pretty good reaction with water. Not as good as the Stampin' Up!, but still really good. And I've said that before, when I'm doing cards, I find that the Stampin' Up! Does great with the water spots, and it works even better if you have Stampin' Up! Paper with Stampin' Up! Ink using the water spots. The Memento gave pretty good effort, not as good as these two, but still you can see some variation in the color. You can see how it was removed, and you kind of get that dark outline on some of these water spots. The Adirondack looked like it didn't really do anything. I mean, you can sort of see, and if you get up there really close, you can see the water spots, but they don't kind of scream texture to you. Like if you had it on the background of your card, you probably wouldn't notice it that much. It is a little noticeable, but not a lot. And then these two, not really anything. This one definitely minimal. Yeah, not too much there. Just the paper became bumpy, and you can see the raised up spots, and they are just a tiny, tiny bit faded. And this one, it just raised up the paper. It didn't remove the color at all, which is very strange. Interesting. So I guess these really absorb really well into the cardstock. They're not coming out. So anyway, there you go. That's the water effect. I hope you enjoyed this ink comparison, and if you would like more information, visit my blog at darlenedesign.com.